Before we get into today's episode, and trust me, there is a lot to get into, I want to talk to you about your skin, which I know is a weird thing to come from this podcast, but you're stressed. You're reading the news, you're probably not sleeping great, and your skin knows it. I know mine does. Facial in a Bottle by Love Indus is a single product that does the work of a full professional facial at home in minutes. Clean ingredients, real results, no appointment required. Go to loveindus.com and use code MIMS25 for 21% off your first order. All right, let's get on with the show. It's Tuesday, March 3rd, 2026. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Hermes. The only thing to talk about today is the United States and Israeli war against Iran. By now, you all know what's happening, but what I want to talk about is the why and how. How this war started, even though there were peace talks and that negotiators had said the night before the first bombings happened, were going well. Why the Trump administration says we were at war, because depending on who you ask on any given day or even any given hour, that answer seems to change, and how the White House and experts think this might end. And spoilers, they don't agree. Now, before we get into all of that, make sure that you're following or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's get on with the show. It has been 3 full days since the U.S. and Israel launched a war against Iran, cutting off ongoing peace talks and once again plunging the Middle East into a conflict that is dangerously close to destabilizing the entire region. As of when I'm recording this, the Iranian Red Crescent, which is their version of the Red Cross, is reporting more than 800 people have been killed by U.S. and Israeli bombs, including a school full of girls on the very first day. There have also been 6 Americans killed so far. This morning, the U.S. closed embassies in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Lebanon after multiple embassies were attacked in surrounding countries, including Pakistan, where 22 people were killed. So that means that Trump now has his very own Benghazi scandal, which I'm sure Republicans will go after with the same unending zeal that they had for Hillary Clinton. The State Department also sent out orders telling U.S. citizens abroad to evacuate just about every Middle Eastern country, something they normally would have done before the strikes, or at least the day of, not 3 days after, because airlines don't like flying when there are drones and missiles everywhere. Weird, I know. And what that's meant is that U.S. citizens have been stranded in countries where drones are being deliberately crashed into high-rise buildings and hotels, and missiles are striking capital cities. Among those citizens stranded right now is a retired U.S. Major General who told CNN, "As Americans, we feel abandoned," because he's watching other countries like the UK and India get their people out, but the U.S. has refused to send help for Americans left behind. In fact, most of them right now are calling embassies and getting recorded messages on the emergency lines from the U.S. government telling them to find their own ways home or shelter in place. And as a reminder, this is the same government being led by a president who just last week said the number one job of the government was to protect U.S. citizens. But I digress. Oil prices are also on the rise as Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, where somewhere around 1 out of every 4 gallons of oil on the planet is shipped through, not to mention a ton of other things the global economy relies on. There are already fears that countries like India and China might start hoarding oil, and if that happens, it could cripple our allies like Japan and South Korea, which right now only have about 9 months of oil in their reserves because the U.S. didn't tell them we were planning another war in the Middle East, which is a thing you normally tell your friends about. And I will get to where all of this is heading at the end of the episode, but we should start with how this happened. Because since June of last year, the United States and Iran had been engaging in peace talks, mostly about Iran's nuclear program. Now, Iran wanted to be allowed to restart its program for energy purposes. That's what they said. Well, the position of the Trump administration was that was impossible because it could lead to a nuclear weapon. And the Iranians had attempted to make several concessions, but none of them included giving up a nuclear program. Those negotiations were being led by Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and his real estate buddy turned top ambassador, Steve Witkoff. Both men are deeply compromised when it comes to the Middle East, because they have massive business holdings in that region, particularly benefiting if Iran, weren't around. In a briefing on Saturday with senior administration officials, they said the talks broke down because Iran wouldn't meet the Trump administration's demands of no nuclear power and that they were building up a stockpile of missiles. We'll talk about that in a second. But what really became clear, according to the national security reporter Laura Rosen, was that U.S. negotiators did not understand the Iranian proposal, and that one of the negotiators at the table, the Omani foreign minister, came to D.C. to meet with the vice president and then do an interview on CBS to explain what he feared Kushner and Witkoff didn't understand, likely hoping to reach the president. So what we had here was a case of two wholly unqualified people handling potentially globally upsetting talks. Except there is one other thing here. At the same time those talks were happening, Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had been talking for months about a strike on Iran. Iran has for decades threatened to get a nuclear weapon to wipe Israel off the map, and no one wants that. I need to be very clear about that. That is bad for everyone. But destroying Iran has also been a 40-year obsession for Netanyahu. Striking Iran is a part of Netanyahu's plan to expand Israel. Now, some people said that plan is only expansion into Palestine and parts of Lebanon. Others say it's as large as extending it all the way from Egypt to across Syria and Saudi Arabia. But either way, a weakened or non-existent Iran helps that mission. That, to be clear, would be considered a massive breach of international law on top of the UN-designated genocide that Netanyahu is already overseeing in Gaza. So, he was heavily involved in steering Trump's decision-making here, which caused a lot of concern even in the White House about just how much influence a foreign leader was having over the president, though it's worth saying that today Trump said that wasn't true and that he was the one who forced Netanyahu to war, which, for a guy who promised not to start any new wars while president is a pretty big admission. So that's how we got here. Peace talks that failed, either because of incompetence or willful sabotage or both, and a president who felt big and strong being pumped up by his Middle Eastern best friend with an obsession. But none of those things are reasons for why this needed to happen now. And so far, what the administration has been telling the American people has been shifting. Back in January, the president and officials were threatening to get rid of Iran's leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, because of crackdowns on protesters that killed thousands of people. And then the first strikes that we sent over the weekend did kill the Ayatollah. Now, I'm not saying that was bad. He was a blood-soaked dictator who was a true threat to the world. And that's been the position of the U.S. for a half-century, from Democrats and Republicans alike. But the case here was not made to the American people about why we should go to war. We just did it. And the reasoning has shifted. At first, it was about preventing Iran from getting nuclear weapons. Here Trump is in his first video from Mar-a-Lago.
They've rejected every opportunity to renounce their nuclear ambitions, and we can't take it anymore. Instead, they attempted to rebuild their nuclear program and to continue developing long-range missiles that can now threaten our very good friends and allies in Europe, our troops stationed overseas, and could soon reach the American homeland. Just imagine how emboldened this regime would be if they ever had and actually were armed with nuclear weapons as a means to deliver their message.
So, first of all, what is this thing, right? If you're watching this, it's pretty clearly AI edited, and the president is in a baseball hat where you can't see his eyes, and he's in bad lighting, standing in front of a pipe and drape background and a couple of flags at his resort in Mar-a-Lago. He is sending Americans to war. And he says in this video, it is a war and that soldiers will die. And he couldn't be bothered to fly back to the White House to just put this on camera from the Oval Office, not even live, just get it taped. Usually when presidents take military action, they understand the gravity of it, and they show the American people that they understand the gravity of it. And this doesn't have any of that. Second, we were told last year that Iran's nuclear program was obliterated, so destroyed that it would take them decades to rebuild if they ever could. So why would this war need to happen over their nuke program? It means either they were lying then or they're lying now. But members of the U.S. intelligence agencies and the U.S. Senate came forward and said there was no evidence that Iran was anywhere close to a nuke. Here's Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz.
So there is no doubt that a year ago, Iran had an active and ongoing nuclear weapons program. We took out the vast majority of that at the end of the 12-day war. Where
that
Israel
U.S. intelligence assessment was not made public, if that is what was briefed to you.
We launched targeted bombs at the end of the 12-day war where we dropped the equivalent of about a third of a nuclear weapon on those underground facilities like Fordo, which is built into the base of a mountain. The bunker buster bombs we used, Israel doesn't have those bombs. No other country has those bombs. We took them out last year.
So, oops, Ted probably wasn't supposed to say that because it undercuts the thing the administration has been saying. So then the story changes. Again, it was actually the administration was worried about what if Israel started a war and Iran fired back, so we had to start the war first. Here's how officials put it in that briefing on Saturday. Quote, "We had indicators that they intended to use their missiles potentially preemptively, but if not, simultaneously, with any actions against them immediately against our threats." Adding later, "We acted in a preemptive, defensive way to prevent those launches from occurring." Never mind the, Minority Report level oxymoron that is preemptive defense, but if that first part of that sentence made no sense to you, don't worry, it didn't make any sense to anybody else either. And also, it wasn't true. Because here's the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Democrat Mark Warner, on CNN this weekend.
I saw no intelligence that Iran was on the verge of launching any kind of preemptive strike against the United States of America.
None.
None.
No evidence for a need of some kind of precog defense, which is why the reasoning changed again. This time, officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, said actually this war is about making sure that Iran couldn't build up missiles to defend itself or strike other countries while it enriched uranium to build up a nuclear program because we obliterated it last year. Here's how Hegseth put it in a press conference on Monday.
That's why I talk about conventional umbrella to blackmail nuclear ambitions. They were building up this conventional arsenal in order to ensure that no one would ever block them from their ability to get nuclear weapons. So we're very clear-eyed about the...
So, yeah, that's nonsense. If it were true that Iran had been building up those forces, they would be working against our strikes right now, and they're not. So because that didn't make sense, last night the vice president was sent out to say, actually, it's because of the nukes again, and don't worry, we have a clear plan.
Is that he's not going to let his country go to war unless there's a clearly defined objective. He's defined that objective as Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon and has to commit long-term to never trying to rebuild their nuclear capability. It's pretty clear. It's pretty simple. And I think that means that we're not going to get into the problems that we've had with Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah. The last 3 days have been anything but a clear objective, as you've just heard. And there is a real fear that because of that, this is going to be another long, drawn-out war in the Middle East. But before we get to what happens next, there's one more why that I want to talk about. So, the president sees this as personal, at least partly, in two big ways. First, an official told The Atlantic that the president is feeling like I'm on a roll, like this is working. After the regime change attack we launched in Venezuela last month, never mind that only around 1 in 3 Americans actually approve of that. But the other reason that Trump said yes to this and why it feels like they're kind of making this up as they go is because of what Trump told ABC about the Ayatollah. He said, I got him before he got me. Trump referencing there an alleged Iranian plot to kill him in 2024. We know that Trump is driven by retribution. A biographer of his called it his philosophy of revenge. It's how he lives his life. And it would seem like Trump is urged into launching this war by people in his inner circle and Netanyahu to get even, more than even actually, with the Ayatollah. And that just isn't a compelling objective for which you send Americans to die. but it is a compelling reason for Donald Trump. So what we get now is this kaleidoscope of reasons for everyone else and justifications for a war that is likely illegal, which is actually a good place to move on to this last part of our episode here, which is what happens now. For starters, here at home, the Senate is expected to vote on a resolution to force the president to adhere to the War Powers Resolution Act, which means the president has to report to Congress about what the military is doing, and any operation can only last 60 days before a 30-day withdrawal. The president is technically already in violation of that law because he has to notify Congress within 2 days of launching strikes, and he missed that window, but who's counting? Certainly not Congress. The House doesn't get back until later this week, where they could vote on their own resolution. There's kind of no telling right now how that would go in either chamber, but members on both sides are not happy with this whole thing. It'll also likely impact the fight over the government shutdown and keeping DHS closed, because some members who might be on the fence about doing that might move to open DHS back up because it would fund our cybersecurity or what's left of it, or the TSA or FEMA. We'll just wait and see. Now, over in the Middle East, it looks like things are about to get really, really bad. Missile strikes are escalating, and the U.S. is in a race right now to finish whatever the objective actually is before we run out of interceptor missiles, which are very expensive, costing anywhere from $4 to $12 million a pop. And when we're using them to shoot down $20,000 Iranian drones, that math does not work out in our favor pretty quickly. Now, Iran's missile stockpiles and drone fleets aren't endless either, and they've been pretty much firing at anything and anyone they can hit in what looks like an attempt to drag the entire Middle East into this war, which has started to backfire a little bit. You can only hit so many baseballs in your neighbor's windows before they get really pissed off. Now, one of those neighbors they hit was Cyprus, which is near Greece and is a member of the European Union, meaning while the U.S. doesn't have support from, say, France or Germany to fight Iran, those two, along with Greece, have to defend Cyprus because they're members of the EU. So now Europe is in this thing, and we've got ourselves a two-continent war. On top of that, in Iran, we don't know who the new leaders will be. The administration was hoping to do essentially what was done in Venezuela, which was to keep basically the same government in power, but just have the people who replaced the Ayatollah run Iran under the threat that the U.S. is going to attack them again, kind of like a mafia-style diplomacy. But we killed the next top people in line, so we have no idea who's in command or control of Iran, and that never ends well. In the past, those things lead to factional fighting and insurgencies, and a lot of innocent people getting caught in the middle and killed. In fact, Trump himself, just this afternoon, said whoever does emerge as the leader could be just as bad as the Ayatollah, saying, you go through this, and in 5 years you realize you put somebody in who's no better, which is maddening. Because if that was the possibility, it begs the question, why do this way at all? Right now, we don't know how long this will all last. At first, the president said a few days. He actually tried to give a peace deal to Iran almost immediately. They said kick rocks, and then the president said it'll take a week and then a month, and now it's 5 weeks to maybe longer. It's the exact message the Bush administration gave at the outset of both the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now I'm not saying that this is going to be those. We just simply don't know. But what we do know is that the administration is grasping at straws for a reason they think will get the public on their side after launching a war without legal approval that could at best plunge the Middle East back into regional turmoil and at worst cause a collapse of the global economy and potentially start a massive multi-continental conflict because Trump got talked into a revenge war by his best genocidal friend and his son-in-law. All right. That is it for today's episode. Please rate or review wherever you get your podcast. It really helps the show keep growing and reach more people. Become a subscriber to the Make It Make Sense Substack, where this week's Things You Forgot from Civics class is actually a repost from December about how the U.S. is supposed to declare war or deploy the military. It felt like this might be a good time for a refresher on that one. And this week's original reporting is all about how America's cybersecurity has been gutted since Trump took office again, and why that might be a roadmap to cyber attacks from Iran, and why the president might actually want an attack to take over elections this November. That is reporting you're not going to find anywhere else, and you can get it for just $5 a month. And as always, Share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. It's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am @GrantHerms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and @Grant_Herms on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.